I have in the past. I don't normally do that unless I have, if I'm injured in some respect. But I do sometimes, but not very often. I used to have it as part of my training program where I would have kind of like a lower intensity day.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very excited to have Dr. Jeremy Loenneke, and he is going to be talking about a topic that I am super interested in. It's been getting a lot of talk recently, especially as it comes to being able to continue to strength train and lift weights in a healthy way as you get older. And so it's a really, really interesting strategy that he's going to talk about, that he's done a lot of studies and research on. He graduated with a PhD in exercise physiology from the University of Oklahoma. He also previously earned a master's degree in nutrition and exercise science from Southeastern Missouri State University. And his research focuses on skeletal muscle adaptations to exercise in combination with blood flow restriction. So blood flow restriction, not sure how many of you listening right now have heard about it, but this is something you're gonna want to learn about, especially as you get older. It's a really incredible thing that we're going to dive really deep into today. His work has answered several important methodological and safety questions with respect to applying blood flow restriction. So he's a member of the American College of Sports Medicine and the American Physiological Society. He also serves as a peer reviewer for several journals, including Sports Medicine, AGE, Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise, and the Journal of Applied Physiology. A long list of accolades, a lot of research done. So I'm super excited to be hearing from the source himself. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Talor. Appreciate it, man.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So looks like a lot of your studies have been, why don't we actually start with, many people may not know what blood flow restriction is. Do you want to maybe before we get into that, we could talk just briefly about how you became interested in blood flow restriction and the research that you've been doing, and then maybe give people a little primer on what it is.
Yeah, sure. So I started reading about blood flow restriction when I was in my undergrad. So that would have been, I probably started around 2007. Started reading about blood flow restriction, but I didn't really think I was understanding what I was reading. So I was just an undergrad trying to read research, reading that, restricting blood flow somehow resulted in good things. So I just kind of assumed I just didn't understand what I was reading. Then I went up to the University of Illinois. I was doing an internship in one of the muscle phys labs up there with Dr. Huey. And I was working out at the gym, Gold's Gym, the mecca of natural bodybuilding at the time was Gold's Gym, Champaign. And there's a couple guys up there, Lane Norton, Gabe Wilson, and Chris Foz, and they were kind of messing around and talking about this idea of blood flow restriction and how could you possibly do this in the gym. So then I was like, well, maybe I was reading that correctly. So then I just started reading kind of all through the research, did my internship project on blood flow restriction, went back to Southeast Missouri State, did my master's studying practical blood flow restriction. So how can we apply this just in like a normal person in the gym setting? Then I went to the University of Oklahoma, did my PhD there with Dr. Mike Bimbin. Focused a lot on blood flow restriction. I also met Dr. Takashi Abe, who's really a legend in this area of muscle phys, especially blood flow restriction. And we became really close friends. And from there, it just took off. I started at the University of Mississippi as an assistant professor in 2014 and just finished my 9th year there. So we study lots of things, but our big focus certainly is blood flow restriction.
Nice. Amazing. So why don't we start with the basic real quick? What is blood flow restriction training for those who don't know?
Yeah, so essentially you're taking a cuff or a wrap and you're placing it at the top of a limb, whatever limb you're looking to exercise. So if you're doing the bicep curl, you would put it at the top of your arm. If you're doing squats or a leg extension or lunges, you'd put it at the top of your leg. And the idea is that you're going to apply it to a pressure that only partially restricts blood flow. So blood flow is going into the limb. It's just being reduced. So when that's done and it's combined with kind of low intensity, low load exercise, we start to see a lot of beneficial adaptations that we wouldn't normally see. So changes in muscle size, changes in muscle strength, some changes in some of the vasculature, maybe some changes in tendon. So a lot of things that you wouldn't expect to see with that low of exercise without blood flow restriction. So yeah, again, it's only a partial restriction of blood flow for small amounts of time.
Yeah, yeah. And my understanding around it too is that one of the benefits, especially for people as they get older and don't want to be, lifting hundreds of pounds at a time, is that you can use much lighter weights. But by doing this blood flow restriction, you can do much lighter weights, much easier weights, and still get tremendous benefits. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. At submaximal exercise intensity. So, if the most that you can lift is 100 pounds, we would normally recommend that you lift around 70 pounds or 60 pounds. With blood flow restriction, you can get that without 20 or 30 pounds.
Wow.
And, and I'll go ahead and say that, there's plenty of older people who can lift heavy weights and who choose to lift heavy weights, and that's perfectly fine. Blood flow restriction just offers another option for people who want to kind of sustain exercise for across their health span or lifespan. And I think you're right. I think some people do like to lift heavy weights, but a lot of people don't. And this is one of the options for them.
Yeah, I'll tell you, once I used to love lifting heavy. I still love lifting weights, but now as
Yeah.
I've gotten in my 40s, it certainly would be easier if I could get the same results without having to, exert myself so hard with these super heavy weights and do that. I still do it. And I do want to talk about some concerns. I guess probably the reason I haven't gone full into blood flow restriction, even though I've heard about the benefits a few different times now. It comes up consistently. And so I do want to probably talk about like, what's the right way to do it? Like, obviously people like myself and others listening were probably nervous. Like, well, what am I, I'm going to tie this tight cuff around my arm or my leg. And like, what if it's too tight? Like I'm lifting weights. Like, it's kind of scary. You don't want anything, to happen to you. So would love to hear about, any kind of safety protocol or right or wrong ways to do it. Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways you could do it. One way is if you had a blood flow restriction device, right? Then it becomes a little bit easier because then you know what the pressure is. So I'll talk first about that. So if you have like a blood pressure cuff or a blood pressure device and you were to place it at the top of your limb, the way that we set that pressure is it's very, very similar to systolic blood pressure. So whatever cuff is going to be used, we apply that to whatever limb we're looking to exercise. We then take something like a Doppler probe, like a handheld probe or something that can detect a pulse, and we apply it proximal to that cuff. And we then slowly inflate that cuff until we get to the lowest pressure at which there is no pulse. So that would be the arterial occlusion pressure. So let's say that's 100 millimeters of mercury. In our lab, we would then apply a percentage of that. So we typically use 40%. So we would apply 40 millimeters of mercury. And that way you know that blood flow is always going into that limb, right? So that's if you have a device, right?
Right.
What if you don't have a device? What if you are doing practical blood flow restriction, something that I did my master's thesis work on, and we've done a little bit of work on that over the past 10 years or so. Well, then it becomes a lot more complicated. The first thing I would say is if you are in a clinical setting or, if you work in a clinical setting, I probably would make sure I know what the pressure is. So I would probably have some idea to know what pressure I'm applying to a patient. But if it's just for yourself and you're just experimenting in the gym with knee wraps, one of the ways that you could do it is you could apply it to a pressure that feels unscientifically snug, right? And one of the things that you can do is you can use the workload to kind of give you an idea of how much pressure is being applied. So, for example, if you apply the wraps to the top of your leg and you're already in pain before you start exercise, it's too tight. You need to loosen it up. If you know the load is low, so let's say 20 or 30% of your max, and you apply the blood flow restriction knee wraps, and you can't even do 10 reps in the first set, it's too tight. So you should be able to do around 30 repetitions in the first set, maybe around 15 or so, maybe not exactly 15, you're going to be fatigued, maybe 10 to 15 in the second set. That'll give you some idea that you're approximately close. One of the other ways that we've found might work pretty well is if you were to apply it to a percentage of your thigh circumference. So, for example, if it's like 30 centimeters, maybe you apply it 10% of that. So, and you'd pull it, and that would give you kind of a more reproducible way of doing that. We've had some success with that, but I think it's fair to say that it becomes a lot less scientifically sound when you're doing practical blood flow restriction. I mean, you have a lot of wiggle room, but I don't think I think if you're in the gym by yourself, on yourself, I don't think it needs to be that precise. I think if you get anywhere between 40 and 80%, you're probably doing okay.
Okay. Makes sense. Well, let's talk about, though, probably people starting, kind of starting out right now, like myself. I don't think I'd be super comfortable just like again, if I did it, I'd probably do it super loose at first because I wasn't comfortable. I'd probably want to, and maybe that's just me because I blow a lot of money on health stuff because it's what I enjoy, but I'd probably buy the actual real devices. So you mentioned a couple times wraps, and then you also mentioned devices. I've heard of, there's a couple devices. I think they cost a few $100 or something like that. What are the different ways to do this? Obviously, if people have the money, then buying the devices would probably be recommended. And if so, what are the kind of the gold standard devices?
There's not really a gold standard device, I don't think. I think if, as long as you have a cuff system that you can apply and know what pressure you're applying. One of the ideas, like the Delphi cuff, for example, when you apply that cuff, it'll increase. It'll basically take that arterial occlusion pressure for you, what I described earlier, and then you can set a percentage of that. I think there's other cuff systems. I don't really have experience with a lot of them, but I know that there's plenty of them that are pretty good. Maybe the Be Strong cuffs, I think that might be a name. There's a lot of them.
Okay, and most of them will come with. I think that's important that it comes that it measures it for you and lets you know. Okay, yes, I have it exactly on the right pressure, and I think that would just to, if nothing else, to relieve my anxiety or other people's anxiety when they're lifting, to know that hey, this isn't too tight. So pretty much. So you mentioned, what was the name? The one you used, Delphi or something?
Well, Delphi is one that you can use. It's used a lot in the clinical world. We use the Hokinson system, which is basically made for indirect assessments of blood flow. We just use it for blood flow restriction. And that's getting at kind of the idea. And to be fair, most of the research is done using the Hokinson. I wouldn't necessarily call it a gold standard. It's just a method that's commonly used. But there are lots of devices. There's a lot of devices on the market that I think a lot of them are very good. I would guess that a lot of them are very good. I haven't used most of them, but the Katsu, that's one of the originals.
I've heard of Katsu a couple times. I've had that come up.
Yeah, we've used that before. I think what you'd be looking for is, can I take the arterial occlusion pressure with this method? If I can, then that's how we're basically applying that in the scientific literature as a percentage of that.
Got it. Cool. So people may be wondering now, okay, well, all right, this sounds like, I got to get some device or I got to do this thing. What are the benefits? What are the studies showing in terms of like the benefits of this type of training versus, regular training?
Yeah. So regular training being kind of high load exercise, right?
Sure.
Because a lot of these other benefits you can see with low load exercise if you go to failure on every set. That's not required with blood flow restricted exercise. You can do this sub-maximally. So what I would say is, if you can see an advantage with traditional high load exercise, you're probably going to see something very similar with blood flow restricted exercise with low loads. um, with respect to resistance training. So I guess I'll just start. I'll just explain how I talk about blood flow restriction. I think about it in kind of three separate phases. The first one is there's some data. There's not a lot. There's some data that suggests that if you can't do anything, let's say you're hurt, you can't walk slowly, you can't do anything. There's some literature that applying the cuff, inflating and deflating, can slow down the loss of muscle size that occurs, that atrophy response to unloading, and can maintain muscle strength. There's some. There's not a lot, and I don't know the reason why there's not a lot, right? So that's one of the things you can keep in mind. That's a strategy that you might be able to use, knowing full well that there's only some support. But for me, if you can't do anything, it's worth potentially trying. But once you can start exercising, let's say you can't lift weights, but you can walk, you can cycle. There is some data that walking very slowly or cycling very slowly in combination with blood flow restriction can improve muscle size and strength in certain populations. So I don't think you're going to take someone who's very, very active and have them come in and walk very slowly with blood flow restriction and see a lot of benefit. You might. I'm just very skeptical. But if you can't do anything else, that might be a good option because there is data that suggests that is better than just walking slowly without blood flow restriction. The majority of the literature is with resistance training. In other words, lifting weights. So when I lift weights at 20 or 30% of my max with partial blood flow restriction, it can improve muscle size to the same extent of that of high load exercise. There are many studies that show that. Some of the vasculature, so changing blood flow into the limb, there's decent data that suggests that can also do that to a very similar extent. That might be pressure dependent. We're not really sure. There's some data that suggests that you might need high pressure for that response. Muscle growth, not really. It's you have some wiggle room. 40 to 90% produces very similar growth. It appears. So similar muscle size, similar blood flow responses. You do see changes in strength and physical function. But I will say that the changes in strength are usually almost always going to be less than high load exercise, right? So I think that's should be pretty intuitive to most people if you stop and think about it. If you have somebody who's routinely lifting very, very, very heavy weights, and you have another group of individuals who's training very light with blood flow restriction, it stands to reason that the group that's routinely training with very heavy weights is going to be better at doing that. That's what the 1RM test is. Who can lift heavy weights the best, right? So I think that blood flow restriction with low loads does improve strength over low load exercise without BFR. That's true. But it's usually not to the same extent of that of high load exercise. But for most people, they don't really care. They're not usually trying to lift the most weights possible. But if that is a goal of yours, then you should know that this should not be your primary method of training. You're going to want to mix in some heavy weights there. There are some suggestions that the tendon, so, for a long time it was thought that the tendon might require loading. Maybe it favors high loads. There's some recent data that suggests that maybe blood flow restriction actually can improve like tendon cross-sectional area, tendon stiffness, very similar to that of high load exercise. I think that needs some more work, but I think a lot of the adaptations are going to be very, very similar, but you're going to get it at lower workloads.
Wow. Okay, interesting. Really interesting stuff. So and now you mentioned one other thing before we started talking. You mentioned something really interesting, was that the correlation or potentially lack of correlation between muscle growth and strength, right? Which I think is interesting to people. And I have heard this before when I started doing kettlebell training with I started learning from Pavel Tsatsouline, the guy who kind of brought the kettlebell to America, and he would say how Russian trainers would literally just do do light kettlebell swings, but they would do it every day. Whereas in America, we would, do this bodybuilding routine where we go to failure, 12 sets per body part, multiple times per week, and we're sore, which, admittedly, I do that a lot, and I'm sore most of the time, in one body part or another. And he noticed, he said, yes, if you're looking to gain muscle size, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, what you think about this, but you gain more muscle size when you go to failure and lift heavier weights and all that kind of stuff, but not necessarily in terms of strength. If you just did kettlebell swings, light weights, nice and easy every single day, compared to going super hard all out, twice a week, let's say, or once a week, like many people do, you could potentially see similar strength gains, although you wouldn't get the same hypertrophy, right? The muscle growth appearance, right? Curious what you think about that.
So I think I disagree. I partially agree. I think the idea of having to annihilate yourself in the gym to see adaptations, yeah, I don't think that's necessary. I think a lot of people do way more than they need to do, and I think that delays their recovery. I think that, to me, is pretty clear. But some people like to do that, and that's what keeps them motivated to train. So, to each their own. But for strength, I think you need to lift heavy weights. I don't think you need to have growth to do it, but you need to lift heavy weights. I think if you do low loads to failure, you can see changes in strength, and you can see large changes in muscle size. But the strength is going to be less than that of high load exercise. That I feel extremely confident on saying if we're talking about maximal strength. So I don't think you need to lift heavy weights to see muscle growth. I do think you need heavy weights to maximize your ability to increase strength. Now, yeah, one of the things that we were talking about before we got on the air was, one of the ideas that we've started to develop off of some of our research is the idea that, hey, maybe muscle growth actually isn't playing a role with the change in muscle strength. Now, that's complete opposite of what I thought about 10 years ago. And I think if you look at most textbooks, they're going to say, if you want to get stronger, that's due to neural adaptations followed by large contributions from muscle growth. I can tell you that's based on almost nothing. There's no experimental data at all that supports that idea. So, the reason why we started to question that was we were repeatedly seeing muscle growth with low load exercise with BFR produce large changes in muscle size, large, equivalent to that of high load exercise. But the strength was not. So then it starts to wonder, it's like, how much of a role is muscle growth even playing with this? So then we started kind of reading through the literature, trying to figure out why people thought this originally. And then we designed some other studies that had nothing to do with BFR, trying to investigate, trying to tease out if muscle growth is a player. And, we don't find any evidence that it is, at least in the short term, in 6 to 8 weeks. Now, I'll be very clear to say that I think a lot of people disagree with me on that. Plenty of people do. But I think that they would also agree that there's no evidence that it's true, that muscle growth is a mechanism. But they seem to be drawing from some of the baseline relationships. So people who are bigger tend to be stronger. That's true. I'm in complete agreement with that. But when we look at the response to exercise, it basically breaks down. People can get plenty strong without changing muscle size at all. And then when they do gain muscle growth, or when their muscles do get bigger, that doesn't appear to contribute to the change in strength, at least in the available data. So controversial, but controversial in the respect to lots of people disagree. It's not controversial saying that there's no data for it because it doesn't exist. But I think that they put a lot of stock in the baseline relationships, which is fine.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I think most men probably want to see the muscle size, happen. Not just the strength. Being strong is nice, but it's nice to also see it.
For sure.
A lot of women, though, on the other hand, don't really necessarily want to, I've actually heard a couple women say that before, that they don't want to lift too much weights because they don't want to get bulky or something like that, which really doesn't happen that often unless they're really going hard and training like a bodybuilder, I think. But yeah, so let me ask you this. This is an interesting question for you. So like kind of back to that, like what I mentioned about Pavel Tsatsouline and how many people in other countries go lighter but train more frequently. I heard another person say this actually on the Joe Rogan podcast a while ago. I think he was a trainer, MMA trainer. I think he was like George St. Pierre's trainer and some other people. And he was talking about how, he gave an example of like, let's say you can do 10 pull-ups, right? For example. But what if you just did like 5 pull-ups and then stopped and did 5 pull-ups every single day, and you were never sore, but so by the end of the week, I guess you'd done 35 pull-ups, right? Or whatever it is, right? And maybe there's multiple sets, but let's just, so it's 35 pull-ups for the week you did at 5 a day versus doing pull-ups 1 day a week and going hard and doing, 10 pull-ups, and going to failure, maybe, and even if you're doing that once or twice, right? So kind of interesting, like, and that was weird to me when I first heard it, because I grew up on the Arnold Schwarzenegger encyclopedia to bodybuilding and, working out, 2 hours a day, hitting each muscle group hard, being sore for days after. And I thought that was the only way to get growth. And I guess MMA fighters would be another people who would want to dramatically increase their strength, but not necessarily increase their weight or size. If they could be super strong at a lower weight and a lower size, that might benefit them too. So curious what your thoughts are versus on, and maybe how do you train in your own life?
Yeah, I think the frequency question is very interesting. I think it depends upon what variable that you're talking about. So with respect to muscle size and strength, we presented an idea several years ago about kind of what you described, where take the normal volume we're going to do throughout the week and then break it up a little bit, because it's pretty clear that the muscle can only respond so much within a given training session, right? So once you've maximized that response, which probably happens if you do 3 or 4 sets to failure on a muscle group, it's probably, or close to failure, it's probably maxed out. So doing 2 or 3 more exercises for your quadriceps isn't going to do anything for muscle growth. So instead of adding all those extra sets there, why don't you stop and then come back and maybe do it 2 days from now, and then 2 days from now. So that's an idea that we presented. I think it's a really elegant, beautiful idea. I just don't know that it's true. I want it to be true. I like the idea, but I think it's clear that frequency matters, right? Mm-hmm. To a point. The question is, what's that point? So if we had the idea of maybe training each muscle group 4 times a week, I just don't know that it doesn't mean it's not true, but there's not clear data showing that that's going to make a big difference. Maybe 2 days a week, but just 3 relative to 2 might be pretty small. So maybe it's there, but it's really, really small. 4 versus 2, I don't know. So I think 2, depending on how you do it, might be better than 1. But then once you get beyond that, it might be very, very hard to detect. But yeah, I like the idea of training a little bit more frequently. I train upper body twice a week, lower body twice a week. I've done, many different things. I tried a protocol one time where I was squatting basically every single day, where I was doing high volume squats every day and felt miserable. Then I've done stuff where, you train every day, but a little bit lower volume, kind of what you described. And I don't know, it's hard to say what was best. For me, given my job and lifestyle and everything else, going up there and doing a pretty quick workout 4 times a week is best for me. I'm talking about like I train maybe 25 minutes. So wow. Upper body, then lower body. I do like 1 exercise per body part, maybe 2 if I'm feeling really good. But it's just, I don't think that there's a lot of emphasis put on maintenance I think there's a lot of, all the focus is on getting more muscle mass, getting more strength, getting more, getting more, getting more. And if you want to do stuff like that, then you need to try and keep adding more and more and more. But you can maintain on very little. So for me, at this point in my life, when I have a lot of other things on my plate, this is what fits me best. I'm not training for anything anymore. I don't do bodybuilding anymore. I don't do powerlifting. So this is perfect for me. But so that's kind of how I set up my training. Yeah.
You had some bodybuilding you did bodybuilding in the past, right? I think I saw some pictures of you, man. You were pretty ripped.
I thank you. I was. You're very kind. I was on my best day. I was very mediocre, but I did really enjoy the sport. I don't think I competed in 2006, 2007, then 2009, I think. That was probably the last time I did it. When I was getting ready to start my doctoral studies, I stopped doing bodybuilding and started doing powerlifting. So powerlifting is also very enjoyable, but it's just not for me anymore with my just everything else I have going on in my life.
Yeah, it's a commitment and it's hard, powerlifting for sure, especially as you get older. No question about that. So with your training, you mentioned 2 upper body, 2 lower body days. I'm still doing more, and that's interesting too, right? Because then you can kind of you can get more frequency, but not as many. I'm actually doing quite a bit. I actually typically will do 12 sets per body part, right? Let's say I'll do maybe chest and back one day, and I'll do 12 sets of chest and 12 sets of back. But then, I'm probably lifting weights 4 days a week also. So I'll have 3 different sessions, maybe chest and back, maybe shoulders and legs, and then maybe an easy day will be just arms or something like that. And then kind of rotate those 3 cycles. And I do other things too. I play soccer and I try to mix up some other things in between there as well. High intensity and stuff as well. But you mentioned you do upper body twice a week, lower body twice a week, and then are you using blood flow restriction, let's say for one of those sessions per week on each body part, kind of doing, or no?
I have in the past. I don't normally do that unless I have, if I'm injured in some respect. But I do sometimes, but not very often. I used to have it as part of my training program where I would have kind of a lower intensity day and then one day where I'm training really, really heavy. Now I kind of do something similar, but I just kind of do it without blood flow restriction. So, it's just all how I feel. And, I'll also add that, outside of the lifting weights, one of the things I started doing probably, I don't know, four years ago or so is, walking every day, right? And I know the 10,000 step thing is based on propaganda to sell a pedometer back in the day from Japan. But that was where I started, 10,000 steps a day. And now I'm walking about 15.5. That's my goal step count for most 6 days a week. So that's about 7 miles for these legs. So I'm just, again, trying to maintain overall kind of health span for as long as possible.
Yeah. Walking, I mean, it just keeps coming out more and more studies about it. Literally, if people just walked, 40 minutes a day, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at night, or 40 minutes even one session, you did that every day, that would, extend your lifespan, make you feel better, decreases your chance of getting depression and everything else. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. It's just the easiest incredible tool, and anyone can do it, really.
Or even doing kind of one of the things that you said is I do other things. That's what kind of spurred the idea is I do other things like soccer. It's I think a lot of people, if they knew that counted, so to speak, it's when we played basketball as a lab, I was exhausted for 2 days. I'm that's the best workout I've had in years. Yeah. So I think if the intramurals and getting involved in a lot of those things, I think would be very beneficial, because I think a lot of people, when they think about cardiovascular work, they think about running, and most people, or not most, but many people don't like to run. I don't like to run. So
Right.
then they're like, well, I'm not doing cardio. But there's many different ways to do cardio
Right.
that you might enjoy more. So I don't know.
Yeah, I do feel that's important too because the thing about strength training is great. I'm always going to do it. I love it. We all know it's one of the most important factors as you get older to keep muscle. You have to strength train. You have to prioritize protein. But also, it's a lot of like, when you're bench pressing, you're just like, you're kind of static going forward. You're doing shoulder press. You're just kind of static. You're not getting the twists and turns and the movements. And so like, that's where it's like, I play soccer and like, my feet and ankles and hips and all different sides of my muscles that I never hit during normal weight training, and the mobility that I'm doing. I also do mobility with the trainer because I realized I wasn't doing mobility, so I literally hired a trainer who was the mobility specialist trainer. So
Sure.
I'm good at lifting weights. I don't need a trainer for that. I felt mobility. I have to force myself. So those are things that I think are really important as you get older as well, to keep that mobility and not just be because you can lift a lot of weights. I see some guys at the gym too. They're older and they're really big, but they just look very stiff and immobile. And I want to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, the I think one of the ideas that's been put forth many years ago at this point, but Douglas Patton Jones, the kind of the catabolic crisis model, right? I think a lot of the benefit of resistance training and being physically active is just you get injured less. So, if you can stay and maintain kind of whatever you are, once you get hurt, you're going to be losing, you're going to detrain for a period of time, which you might gain some of that back. Especially if you're younger, you're going to gain it all back. But as you get older, you're going to gain less of it back. And then you start having this drop in function. So, yeah, I think doing anything you can to, make sure you can maintain your overall function as long as you can is the name of the game.
Yeah, and the fast twitch too is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Is like as you get older, again, like you can see 60-year-old guys at the gym who are really big and muscular. But I think for me, I also have been trying recently. I've been realizing I need to prioritize the fast twitch muscle movements a little bit more, right? And that's where I think the soccer is great, or basketball, or anything else like, or even just doing box jumps or something like that, where even jumping rope, right, is a good one, right? Just to keep that fast twitch muscle fiber, because I did hear, especially as you age, when you get older, a lot of it is obviously the loss of muscle, but specifically as well the fast twitch muscle fiber to keep your balance, to keep things. So that's one thing that I'm trying to make sure I keep and try to prioritize a little more as well. Because again, static weight training is not going to have the biggest effects, I think, on your fast twitch muscle fibers as much as it will muscle growth and regular strength.
I mean, you're going to be, I mean, you're definitely going to be recruiting the fast twitch fibers, lifting heavy weights. But I think it's that power component, which, moving explosively, I think is where the idea, kind of what you're describing, I think a lot of people have suggested that, yeah, you might have this, but do you have muscle power, which might be independently associated with all these things? Yeah, I certainly understand the concept. I need to think about it a lot more. I struggle with the muscle power thing. It conceptually makes sense to me, but I think that, yeah, I mean, a lot of people do agree with that, though. I'll definitely say that.
Yeah, I mean, like for example, like if I'm working out my calves on a calf machine, right? I could do that for and I did do that for a long time. But I didn't do jump rope for a long time, and then all of a sudden I would jump rope and I'd be like, oh man, this is like my calves are really kind of like getting fatigued, or this is hard, or it's working different muscles in the back of my feet or whatever
Yeah.
that I wasn't working before. So yeah, it's been good to kind of switch it up and try to get a little bit of both. Especially I like jump rope a lot recently. Just I feel like it's really important. Like you're on your feet already anyway, and to have a little bounce in your step and have that that kind of speed and agility, I think is really good.
It's a great workout, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely. Well, kind of wrapping up here. I mean, this has been amazing. So blood flow restriction. It seems like it's more for So again, I personally would feel more comfortable telling people to start with a device at least, right? To at least start with a device if they can, and that way you can see what the right pressure is if you're going to do blood flow restriction training. I think it's especially beneficial for people who aren't able or don't want to do really heavyweight stuff. Based on this conversation, I think because I still feel pretty good doing heavyweight stuff and feel like I'm in good shape, I'll probably continue doing those. I'm not sure that I'll buy the blood flow restriction myself just yet. I probably will as I get older, or maybe I'll just buy it to play around with it and experiment with it so I can show some older people in my family and people that I know kind of how it works. But I think it's definitely very beneficial for people as you get older. I could see this, for example, for my father, who has a physical therapist that comes twice a week for him, and makes him do very simple, light exercises. But the blood flow restriction, I think, could help him get a lot better results off of those simple exercises. So I think for these people, it's really, really, really key. So any final words on that? And then also, please tell people, like, your research is amazing. Please tell people how they can follow you, find you, and all that.
Yeah, no, I would just follow up and say I completely agree with what you're saying. I think those who are unable or unwilling, it's because many people will listen to this and go, well, I could just lift heavy weights. You certainly could.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not selling blood flow restriction. It's one of those things that you could use as a tool in your toolbox should you choose to use it. For clinicians, when I talk to them, and I'll say that a lot of clinics are using blood flow restriction now in the United States, and at a lot of the D1 schools, like Ole Miss, for example, in their rehab facility, they use blood flow restriction. At the facility back home where I come from, they use blood flow restriction. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of
rehab
yeah,
sounds like a great use case for it. Yeah, so
yeah.
rehabilitating from an injury, in addition to the elderly, that's a great use case.
There's also been people who are, some of the older athletes who sometimes they want to. They've utilized this as an idea of saying, hey, it takes me a little bit longer to recover to my normal training, which then delays my ability to perform as well in my actual sport. So some of them have started kind of messing around with blood flow restriction as well. Space travel, that's one that we didn't touch on that, has some potential utility there. We've done some
Ah,
work on that.
that's
Uh,
super smart. I love that. So that's how we're going to keep our muscles when we go to Mars, blood flow restriction training.
it's one of the ideas.
Mm.
But yeah, I think that people who are unable, the rehabilitation side, certainly lots of evidence. If you just don't like lifting heavy, or you want to use that other tool, because part of the utility of exercise is you have to do the exercise. That's where you get the benefit, but it's hard to maintain motivation for years. So one of the things that you can do is you can switch it up. So maybe I'll have a day where I'm lifting heavy, maybe I'll have a day where I'm doing low lows with BFR, whatever. That would be a way that you could use it, and still lift heavy weights. So you kind of get the best of all the world. So, or you could just not use it. That's also an option. But I think it could be a useful tool for a lot of people. I think how you can find me, I'm on all the social media platforms at JP Loenneke. So at JP Loenneke. Mostly, actually, I shouldn't say all social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm sure there's plenty more now, but I'm probably most active on Twitter. And I usually share, all of our lab's work. I'm very fortunate to work with really good students. I've been fortunate to have really good students in my lab since I've been here. So, that's where you can find me. That's where I'll share, our work, all the ideas that I talk about today. I would love to just say these are all of my ideas and my ideas only, but it's not true. It's from having discussions with my students, having them tell me where I'm wrong or how they think I'm wrong, and just developing these ideas over time, or even taking some of their ideas and saying, hey, actually, I think you're right about this. That's going to now come into my repertoire. So we got a good group here at the University of Mississippi. But yeah, you can find me on all of the social media. We share all of our, or even PubMed. Type in my name, you can find our work.
Nice. Amazing. Amazing. Well, thanks again for all the work that you're doing, all the research that you're doing. Really, really great work. And man, this was great. Really, to have a deep dive and to learn more for myself. Even if the outcome for myself personally is, oh, you know what, maybe it's something for me more a little bit down the road. But I think for other people, it may be very useful right now. Definitely in a rehab situation. I think I'll probably buy a pair anyway, just for myself to play around with and see. Also on days where I don't really, there's days you feel beat up. You don't want to,
Yep.
you don't feel like lifting heavy. That would be a great day to try it. So yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all your knowledge here. This has been really awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening, and just a reminder, if you haven't yet tried any of our Peak Performance products, you get 20% off your first order. We have one of the largest selection of USDA certified organic superfood powders, as well as very high quality supplements, and you get 20% off your first order at buypeakperformance.com. That's www.buypeakperformance.com.